So what I want to do is start with a sort of a very brief history for those of you who are unfamiliar. The Bugbrand system, and what I have here is the old version, and I'll come on to the timeline in a sec. Built by Tom Bugs, although Bugs isn't his real surname, and I don't think he's told anyone what his real surname is, so everyone calls him Tom Bugs. He started in the early 2000s making little noise boxes called Weevils and the odd guitar pedal. He's completely self-taught, no formal electronic engineering training at all. And around 2009 he started developing the modular system, and the way it worked back in those days, if you were interested, you'd put your name on a mailing list, and when your name came up, you'd then commit to buying a frame, and when new modules came up after that, you know, in batches of 10 or 20, it was sort of first come, first served, and so building the system took time, because everything in those days was handmade by Tom and maybe one of his helpers. So, you know, you might think, oh, quite boutique, you know, handmade from Bristol. But pricing wise, it was remarkably good value. So an oscillator, for example, was 90 quid plus VAT. A filter was about 110. So not much different from the Dopefer system that I was building out at the time. And a little bit about the format. So it is 3U, but it uses the American 3U standard called FRAC. So the frames are actually 5¼ inches high, and a FRAC width is 1½ inches, which is sort of the smaller modules, and it runs on plus or minus 15 volts. And obviously, because it's a lab equipment, it uses bananas. So although it might look Euro-racky from a distance, it's completely incompatible, other than the fact it is 1 volt per octave. So with adapters you can mix and match. So at the heart of the system, I suppose, is you know, you have an oscillator, a filter, an envelope, a VCA, and apart from the envelope, they're all pretty standard modules. You know, there's nothing sort of super funky about them. And to give you an example, I'm going to take from the utility oscillator just a triangle wave, so you can hear it, hopefully. Oh, turn all these down. So there's our triangle wave. The oscillators themselves, no different from anything else. They have a pulse, a triangle, and a saw output. So it's quite tame. And then if you just sort of, say for example, pop it into one of Tom's wave folders, and then into maybe a filter, and what you could probably pick up there is the filter being pinged, and it sort of goes from nice and tame to nothing. Because I plugged it in the wrong cable, wrong hole. Right, let me just check my gain here. So the wave folder's quite grungy, which is nice. The filter is a state variable. Only one filter existed in this time frame, which was the state variable filter, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And if you wanted to go even more grungy, one of the modules has a drive circuit built into it, so if we bypass that, and that's in the soft, and we can switch it into hard. So the Bug, like any modular, it will do what you want to do. It doesn't have lots of esoteric modules. I mean, it's oscillators, ways to manipulate the waveforms coming out, be it a wave folder, a filter, a frequency shifter. There's sequencing, quite a lot of logic options, so we can make the sequencing a little bit more interesting. And one of the nice things about it, because it's designed by one person, everything works. You don't have to worry about attenuating or adding gain between different modules as you do on something like a Eurorack. You know, it is a cohesive system designed by somebody who wanted to use it as part of their performances or gallery installations, whatever Tom was doing at the time. And it's just really quite nice. There were some third-party modules. Being FRAC, they're quite rare, but I suppose because Tom didn't have the formal education, he wanted a wavetable oscillator, and so rather than sort of build one, he actually rather liked Paul Schreiber's morphing terrarium, so he just contacted Paul. I think bought 20 boards, and we have one down here. It's a beautiful oscillator, it really is. For anyone not familiar with the synthesis technology, the early stuff, it's just really quite pleasant. For me personally, it's just instant Forbidden Planet. So there's no, I haven't got a 1 volt proctive signal going into it, but to give you a taste, you have 3 banks of wavetables, and all that's happening here is the X, Y and Z are being modulated by a quadrature sine LFO with a little bit of FM from a faster LFO. You can turn interpolation off so that you can actually hear it stepping through the wavetables. And if you switch through the banks, I think you'll get that, you'll understand what I mean by instant Forbidden Planet, particularly on bank C on this way I've set this up. But because FRAC itself is mostly these days consigned to the DIY arena, as I said, there are very few third-party modules. So Tom did that, and when he wanted a quantizer, he just built the Jill Barton one, which obviously just repaneled for this system. And as well as grungy, we can sort of do, you'll have to, I will apologise for some of these patches because they were really just thrown together yesterday. But we can sort of just take a square wave, for example, pop that out. Just and then by sort of putting it into a frequency shifter and a filter. And the key thing here is always, most CV inputs have at least an attenuator, if not an attenuverter. So everything's modulatable and you can create quite a bit of movement with it. This is going into a frequency shifter, then the state variable filter. The nice thing about the filter is we have 2 outputs. each is switchable between two different modes. So the left one is low pass and then band pass, which we can and I have taken those out into a passive switch, so I can just switch those over, and now I'm in high pass mode and then into notch. If I put it back into low, the cue itself, it doesn't go into full screaming resonance, but like the quadrature sine wave oscillator LFOs, the filter has a 1 volt per octave input and it does track nicely. The oscillators and the quadrature LFOs can be LFO or oscillators, and you can switch in between them. And the LFO has an exponential linear FM input as well. The output of that's just going into a VCA, but because it's a square, if we just put some pulse width modulation in, one of the fun modules is feed that into this PT delay. This particular one, funnily enough, I've got a couple of these delays and they all respond quite differently because they were made with different generations of PCB. This one is particularly good for sort of more ambience type sounds, whereas one that I'll have running, one of the ones I'll have running later, is just great for straight delays. But the weakness in the system has always been the envelope, and I'll call it a weakness because when Tom designed them, he used Vcos to manage the envelope curves, and they just don't do snappy at all. But you know, there's enough using sort of logic manipulation and gates and low pass gates and various other things, that doesn't really matter. If you want really short fast envelopes, I would just use a short gate or a trigger that's going into something else to manipulate it, you know, just normal CV gate type controls. So the envelopes themselves, the fact they're not great for really tight percussive sounds isn't a problem for me anyway. The nice thing about them, and in the old system it was just the one envelope, and it's an AD envelope with attenuverters to modulate attack and decay, and you can have an ASR, an AR or loop mode, and 3 different speeds, fast, slow and sort of a fuller range. Now of course in loop mode it just becomes a rise full generator, which means that you can use it as an oscillator, an LFO, and with modulation of the attack and decay you can create some really nice sort of moving sort of control voltages. And it also has an end of cycle out as well, which is quite handy. What else have we got? Yeah, on the third party, there is a sort of like an unofficial official other maker for Bugbrand, and he is a member of the Bugbrand community. This guy called Robert. He's in Paris, or just outside Paris, and he has done a couple of modules. One is this one down here, which is the Orgon Accumulator, which I love. I've got one in my 4U system over here. He also did a radio music with a custom pair of SD cards for Bug users and his own little sequencer. And I'm going to briefly talk about the sequencer now. The Bugbrand one, that is. It comprises of a sequencer hub, which is a pretty standard 8-step sequencer. We've got a gate out per step. We have 2 gate buses, A and B, or off for the stage. To control it, we have an internal clock with an external clock in as well, which are switchable. If we apply a gate to the run, we can stop and start the sequencer, and we have a manual step to tune the stages, 2 reset inputs and a manual reset. The 2 reset inputs are quite nice because, again, using the divisions or the logic, there's a 2-bit multiplexer, various other, a couple of other modules down here which you can use to manipulate gates and triggers. You can create some really nice patterns. It goes forwards, it goes backwards, and there's a random mode, so it just jumps wherever you like. And then we have a range that's just an offset to the stages. That allows us to sort of, with a stepped CV, we can use it as a transpose, for example, in here. And to do a step CV, we come on to sort of one of the control modules, like the touch panel. In the Euro world, if you're familiar with the Make Noise, Pressure Points and Brains module, not this version, but this version down here, it basically came out about a year before Make Noise. It's really part of the Surge programmer. I think you'll find, 3 rows of 4 control voltages with touch panels, a clock in to run sequence, and the touch panels have a pressure out, so the more contact you put of skin onto the plate will give you up to 5 volts for full pressure. And on the older one here, each row has a range switch of 1 through to 10 volts. The reason it's called a sequencer hub is because we have a slave as well. So it has its own CV and gate outputs with tiny little potentiometers for the CV and a switch to determine the gate function. And we can have 3 of these slaves off of the hub, and all of these controls on the left, the run, the reset, the forward, backwards, etc., applies to the hub and each of its slaves. Which means using the CV outs and a sequential switch, we can create, in this case, up to 16 notes, 24, 32, 16, 24, yeah, up to 32 step sequences if you've got the full 3 voice slaves in there. So, what else was I going to do? Yeah, I mentioned the radio music. It's just because I wanted to show you the other PT delay, which does what it's meant to do. So this is just a percussive sample set on the SD card, and I'm using this pressure points to change the station as it clocks through each 4 of the CV voltages, and then it's just going into this simple PT delay. The nice thing about the way that Tom's implemented the PT delay, I mean, it's common in tons of modules, but as we bring the time up, he actually takes the chip into all sorts of weird places. If we max out the feedback as well. It's really nice, sort of glitchy, noisy, and as it comes into a proper range, what we should get is we can actually get some quite nice W feedback as well. And because it's an effect, he's put a bypass switch in, so which is always very nice. what else do we have module wise? The VCOs are very standard. They're reasonably no noise, just in a CV in and out, with an initial gain, and you can switch it for linear and exponential behaviour, which is quite useful. Tom likes glitchy stuff, so we've got a proper bit crusher in here. I mentioned a drive circuit, and as I mentioned in the very early days, he was making sort of little noise boxes called weevils. So he thought it might, he just wanted to try the idea out, and he sort of modified one or redesigned one and stuck it in here. Now that picture may not be brilliant, but it consists of 3 square wave oscillators, each with a high-low range switch, and on the module CV, an FM in or a modulation in for each oscillator, and separate out for each oscillator, a couple of switches to sync 1 and 2 or 1 and 3, and then a ring modulator out, which you can have oscillators 1 and 2 or all 3 of them together. I've just got them going into a DC mixer here, and then into a low pass gate, and just like the little box, it's got a starve control, which is also CVable, and a switch for stable or unstable. What the starve does, it basically attenuates the positive rail, in this case the 15 volt rail, to the whole circuit. The original boxes were just 9 volt, PP3 9 volt batteries, so on its own, I mean, it doesn't track 1 volt per oscillator or anything else. It has some interesting sounds, and if I can find it, I think. And literally just by changing the range switch, we can modify the sounds. And then just by starving the voltage to the circuit, if I change the range on some of these and put it, in fact what I'll do is I'll put it into unstable mode. So in stable it's just the control is fairly linear. In unstable it's all over the place. So that's just a bit of fun really, but it's nice to have some of the sort of, shall we say, the original legacy in the system. Quite a lot of these modules, if Tom wasn't 100% happy with it, he'd never do a second run. So they were, yeah, there aren't many of some of these modules around. Continue on with the theme of what's available. We've got a dual preamp, which allows us to bring line and or sort of dynamic mic signals into the system. There was a second generation oscillator, which is this one up here, the triangle core oscillator. It has slightly different sound, and instead of a triangle saw out, we've got a triangle square, and the saw is coming out of this one at wave, and we got a wave shape which takes us from falling ramp through triangle to rising ramp, and then that's CVable. We lose the sync input, and instead for the FM, exponential or linear response for the FM. And then there's things like noise, a noise crusher, and buried down here, so a nice matrix mixer 4 in, 4 out, which allows you to experiment with, you know, feedback circuits and various other things. The output modules are, there's a pair of them, one's mono, one's stereo, and the stereo one obviously has pan and a headphone socket as well, and the outputs are provided in both 1/4 inch and banana, so I'm daisy chaining the two together. Buried in between them with a pan and FX, a pan and crossfade module. And I think, let's turn these volumes down. But because everything sort of works together quite nicely, all I've done here on this last bit is move away from the grungy, gritty, sort of vanilla type sounds, and so here I'm using an envelope in loop mode as an oscillator, which is being sequenced by a patch, a touch panel. The output of the touch panel is going into the quantizer and then into the oscillator. The output of which is going into a frequency shifter, which we can grunge it up a little bit, and then it's going into yet another PT delay, and the joystick, there's some modulation from another quadrature sine, and the joystick is doing the Y is modulating the FM of the quadrature sine, so I can bring the speed of the clocking and the other modulation points that it's doing down. The X is going into the time CV of the delay. So let's get that out of the way. And the joystick also has these two touch pads, which have a gate output for each touchpad and a pressure output. So A is where's A going? A is doing something with pitch, and B is doing something with the delay. Very subtle there, down there. If I just speed that up a little bit. It sounded much better earlier. Never mind. So all in all, at the end of the day, it is just a modular system. The difference is that it's a single person's vision, and he only made these for 4 years. At that point, he decided he wanted some standalone boxes for performance, so we move up to first iteration, which is a PT delay in a bigger box, and then decided to build it into the same format for framing. And he had the original drum module, drum voice with an expander, and then we went up to parametric EQ, stereo compressor, a modern version of the delay, spring reverb, a beautiful crossover filter, which is an enhanced sort of a pair of those state variables down on the modular, but we can use it as quite surgically, because we have 3 outputs, low, mid and high frequencies, and put them in series or parallel, and then with the expander feed the output of one filter into the input of another and create some nice little feedback circuits within the filter. And I think it was 2016 he started reintroducing a new version of the Blues, much more refined in their circuitry. I'm very happy with my system, so I haven't bothered with that. But one of the modules that he did bring out early, so there was a voice module and a sequencing module, or that was the idea, was this dual digital shift register. And you know, when I saw it, I thought that would be perfect for clocking these 2 old drum voices, and then the newer one, which is sitting up here, the DRM2. But I wanted it in the red case, and so Tom, because of his superb customer service, actually did a custom faceplate for me. So that would normally be blue as part of his new system, but is sort of now red to fit with that. Hopefully that sort of gives you a little bit of a flavour about the guy and the system that the original system that he put together. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go.
Can I ask about the banana plugs, because it's all based on banana plugs, isn't it?
Yes.
How do you find that in comparison to the normal 3.5?
Right. Banana plug. Why is banana plug so wonderful? Apart from the fact that it is the original stackable. If I can bring this into shot. Difficult to see. The connecting shaft is much longer. It's about 1/3 again as long as a 3.5 mil. It's a single core cable. There's no earth. It's just positive. And this part on the shank, the conductive shank, is sprung. So as you push it into the socket, which is full depth, it compresses the spring as it goes in, and then it opens out to make a really good connection. And because of its length, you know, you can stack these things until the cows come home. And unlike stackable cables, you know, you can get up to about 6 before they even start to move. Plus, they're stackable sideways as well, like that. Electrically and mechanically far superior to 3.5 mil jack, which is why I suppose people like Buchla, Surge used them, because it was sort of the kit that they had lying around, you know, using surplus military or scientific test equipment for their early builds, maybe, or that's where they got their parts from. So the banana sockets are wonderful. In fact, I've actually gone to these are mutable instruments modules and some IntelliGel and a Manhattan analog, and they're all converted to bananas, just because it's easier than having horrible 3.5 mil to banana connectors and then having to extend the earths out and do all sorts of nonsense like that.
What's the voltage on the system?
Good question. It's plus and minus 10, or -5 to +5. So signal wise, it works pretty well with Eurorack.
Okay. Is that a surge to the left? Some surge panels to the top left hand corner?
What, that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. It is. Where's my lighting gone? It's for you DIY.
Okay.
There are surge circuits in there. There's dual universal slope generators and various other things, but it's a real mishmash of stuff from the DIY scene. I haven't got it here. It's actually at a friend's studio. I do have an actual Surge, an STS Surge touch controller, which normally sits sort of down here.
Nice.
Yeah, down here. But a friend's borrowing it at the moment. And the last banana system is, get it up, is that one, which is the Kilpatrick Phenol, which is beautiful. Really nice.
You've got some kit, haven't you, in there?
Yeah, I'm 57. I bought my first synth in 1979, which was an EDP Wasp, brand new. I was like 14, 15 at the time. I still can't play keyboards, but so yeah, my system sort of, it's evolved with me, and these days I find myself getting rid of stuff more than I acquire it.
Just one quick question. Sorry, last one. What would you say about the? Is that the Behringer
2600? Yeah.
I mean, what's your? I mean, I actually ordered one, and then I found out that I ordered it through the German website, and then ended up not having to pay tax, so they basically took it away from me. So,
oh dear.
I'm good, because I couldn't actually afford it at the time. And but yeah, what's it like? Is it worth it? Because it's a steal, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. So off topic, does it sound like a 2600? I have no idea. I've never owned one, so I can't tell you that. Is it a good value for money, nice sounding synth? Definitely, without a doubt. It's built like a tank. The sliders, the switches are all very sort of they offer the resistance, and they're positive. I'm not a hater or a fanboy of Behringer, you know, but I just couldn't resist it. And it's great for the money. It's ridiculously good value for money, as long as you don't mind, you know, it being in a sort of all-in-one box. But then again, we do that with most modular systems eventually. I haven't found any real problems with using it with Eurorack at all, and I think it incorporates quite a lot of mods that were done on the original 2600s by owners as well. So, you know, you've got extra outputs on the oscillators, and you can switch them. You've got extra syncs and all sorts of other stuff. So yeah, it is good value for money, without a doubt, and it sounds very nice.
Cheers, thank you.
Apart from the digital reverb, which sounds like shit. But if you go for the grey or the blue minis, they actually have a spring reverb in, although it's a tiny little tank. You know, I think it's probably, in fact, it's the tank in the blue minis is about the same size as this one, but it does make a nice noise though. Yeah, can do. Any other questions before?
The envelope, you mentioned that it uses vectors and
Yes.
that you can use it as an oscillator. Is it actually fast enough to produce high pitches, or
Yeah. If you,
how far is it an oscillator?
yeah. Just give me a second. I'll give you. I'll show you what it can do. So if I,
That sounds exotic.
well, the thing
having
is,
vectors in an oscillator.
yeah, it is a little bit. So if I just pop that out, pop that in. Right. So. it's in the medium range. If I go into high, and then down into LFO. So yeah, it's full range.
So I'm surprised it can't do snappy envelopes if that's the case, because that must be going. That's going at high frequency, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much the frequency; it's the way that I think the curves are. Because I can't even remember exactly where the Vactrols are used.
Okay.
But yeah, it's it's an interesting design. As I said, it's very similar to half of a universal slope generator. The rise and fall generator, which is like a quarter of a maths. Same thing. One of the channels on maths is just a rise fall generator with some different bits and pieces. But they just, for whatever reason, when used as an envelope with just a gate in to, and maybe that's where the Vactrol comes in. It sits between the envelope stage and the gate input.
Okay, it might. Yeah, maybe it's used.
So that might be it. And then there's a pair of Vactrols there. So how he's using them, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I might look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, but fundamentally, I tend, if I want to trigger an LPG or a VCA or something, I'll just use a gate out, because I forgot to mention the sequencer hub. It has two CV outs, one of which you can apply glide to, and then there is a separate gate output with adjustable pulse width for the gate length. So there's all sorts of nice things that you can do to trigger a VCA in time with a sequence, if that's what you want to do. I tend to use this mostly for sort of more, funny enough, more ambient type stuff rather than the gritty sort of nasty things that I've been playing around with today. Just because it lends itself to that quite nicely. The filters are surprisingly musical. Maybe not surprisingly, but they're very musical, I think. They don't scream into self-oscillation, but there's not many minus 12 dB state variables that do. Yeah.
Thank you.
O'Neill, welcome. Anything else? Cool. All right. Well, hopefully it wasn't too tedious, chaps. But
it was great. It was really great. Thank you. Thank you for suggesting it and pulling it together. It was,
how does the sound relate? Because I don't know how low you're hearing. If you're hearing the really low harmonics coming out of this thing.
I thought it sounded. I'm listening with earbuds, and I thought it sounded amazing.
Oh, good. All right.
Like it seriously got my attention. So
yeah, it was pretty meaty.
Yeah. I would say that since Tom started doing, went into sort of proper production lines and stuff, where the boards are being sort of, a lot of it's gone from through-hole to SMT, so it's being flow soldered and everything else by third parties. So he's just hand finishing the modules. He actually has a proper shop on his website, bugbrand.co.uk. Stock is a little bit variable. I still think his prices generally are very competitive for a small maker. When you think how much some of the Eurorack modules, quite vanilla Eurorack modules, go for these days, I think it's ludicrous. And yeah, they sound great. And as a small standalone system, it's amazing how much you can get out of it. I noticed that in the new system, he's dumped the AD envelopes and has got a module which is dual ADSR now, so it can do quite conventional envelope duties. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and
that's cool.
I'll hand over to Sorry, yes.
Yeah,
Ian?
no, I was just going to say, David, if you've got any links of any tracks that you've created or any examples,
Yeah,
it'd
I
be
think
really cool to hear if you could post them.
yes, or you can just go to look me up as A100 user on SoundCloud. I haven't used it for about 6 years, but as a community, I mean, Tom was asked to do. He was curating the sound for an exhibition in Bristol. There, I can't remember the name of the gallery now, but he asked the community to produce sort of radiophonic themed pieces. So most of my little radiophonic experiments are sitting on my SoundCloud. So it's just soundcloud.com A100 user.
Okay, check it out. Thanks very
Yeah,
much.
please do. I mean,
Cool.
you'll notice that the account hasn't had anything updated for 4 or 5 years, but all the my early Bugbrand stuff from sort of, I don't know, 2016, 2014 and wherever, it's up there, and I think it will give you a completely different flavour of what the system can do.